Good morning. I'm Corley Dennison. I'm the Dean of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication here at Marshall University, and we're delighted that everyone is here for the second annual Constitution Week panel on civic affairs. Last year, our discussion was on blogging and the First Amendment. This year, we have an equally timely topic, especially since it's an election year, and that's politics, political parties, and the media in the 21st century. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to your moderator for this morning's program. She will introduce the panelists and lead the discussion. Our moderator, one of the most distinguished news reporters in the state, is Beth Voorhees, host of West Virginia Morning on West Virginia Public Radio. During the 60-day regular legislative session, viewers see her every evening on the TV program, The Legislature Today. The Associated Press Broadcasters Association has awarded Beth the title of Best Radio Anchor for 8 years in a row. Please give a warm welcome to our moderator, Beth Voorhees.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dennison. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I think you are in for a real treat in terms of what you will learn here today from our distinguished panelists. As you listen to them, I encourage you to think of questions or comments that you'd like to give. We will have some time at the end of our presentation today for your questions. So get out your notebooks and start thinking about what you would like to contribute to this discussion today. It's my pleasure to introduce the panelists to you, beginning with Albert L. May, is Associate Professor of Media and Public Affairs at George Washington University, where he directed the journalism program from 1998 to 2005. He has written on media coverage of online politics, including media case studies on Jeremiah Wright, the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, and Hurricane Katrina. Previously, he was a political reporter and editor at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Raleigh News and Observer, and the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Among his honors are a Nieman Fellowship to Harvard University and the George Washington University's Morton A. Bender Teaching Award. Would you please welcome Professor May? Bruce Hardy is Senior Research Analyst at the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania and a member of the 2008 National Annenberg Election Survey Team. His research interests include the effects of political campaigns, the interactive impact of interpersonal communication and mass media on political attitudes and behavior and research methods. He's the co-author of the book, The Obama Victory: How Media, Money, and Message Shaped the 2008 Election, and has published articles in academic journals such as Communication Theory, Journal of Communication, and Public Opinion Quarterly. Please welcome Mr. Hardy, Bruce Hardy. And I understand that he is defending his dissertation next week, so we will be referring to him as Dr. Hardy later on. Dr. Robert Rupp is a professor of history and political science at West Virginia Wesleyan College, where he's taught since 1989. He received his undergraduate degree from Ohio Wesleyan University and his graduate degrees at Syracuse University. His areas of interests are the American presidency and West Virginia politics. He has several entries on state politics in the West Virginia Encyclopedia. Currently, he is under contract from West Virginia University Press for a book on John Kennedy and the 1960 West Virginia primary. This year marks the 50th anniversary of that historic event. Dr. Rupp is a regular contributor to the opinion page of the Charleston Gazette. He also served as an election analyst for West Virginia Public Radio. He was also recently interviewed by PBS and NPR on the passing of Senator Robert C. Byrd. During his 21 years at West Virginia Wesleyan, Dr. Rupp has won numerous teaching awards. Last year, he was a finalist for West Virginia Professor of the Year. In his community of Buchanan, Dr. Rupp has served as past president of the Upshur County Board of Education and currently serves as chair of West Virginia State Elections. Please welcome Dr. Rupp. Thank you very much, and with that, we will begin our presentation today to hear what Albert May, Professor May, has to teach us today. Professor May, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Dean Dennison, and it's wonderful to be back at Marshall. I was here about 5 years ago, at the invitation of Professor Morris, who this summer called me up and told me that you were having this celebration week of the Constitution, and would I be interested in coming down and talking about political parties and the press. My first thought, now that's a challenging Constitutional Week topic because the framers didn't actually mention the press or the political parties in the Constitution. There was this afterthought called the First Amendment, but by and large, the framers of the Constitution, like many Americans today, held both institutions, political parties and the press, in a minimum of high regard. Of course, political parties have played a very important role, and so has political journalism, in structuring our democracy over the last 213 years. But since the dawn of the Republic, political parties and the press, now known as the media, have had a close and mostly symbiotic relationship. The norm that journalists should not be partisans, should be clearly detached from the interest of political parties, is relatively new, a development largely of the second half of the 20th century. For the last decade of this century, there's been a debate about whether that norm, that separation between press and party, is either eroding or disappearing, and to what degree we're returning to this old system where you had a press that was more polarized, more partisan in the past. This debate has been fomented by a couple of events. One is polarization of political elites, particularly in the Congress, and a fragmented media environment beginning in the mid-1990s with the rise of cable talk and the digital revolution. What you see behind me is an advertisement that Fox News ran in major newspapers all over America in 2004. Now, you may think there's some hubris involved here, that given that Fox has been the lightning rod about this debate about whether we're having a more partisan media develop. So Fox ran this ad against CNN, claiming that Fox itself actually had a more bipartisan audience than CNN did. In its short 15 years history, Fox has changed the media climate. But it goes far beyond Fox, and one of the interesting things last week, in anticipation of this thing, I'm sure the Pew Center for the People in the Press released their biennial massive survey of American media consumption. And there's some wonderful material in this survey, and I highly recommend it to anybody that's doing interested in the landscape of our media today, not just on this issue of parties in the press or partisanship. But what they found in this latest survey is that Fox would have a hard time running that ad again against CNN. And what this is the percentage of each member of the percentage of each party that regularly watches Fox. So now, and you can see the gap has widened perceptibly in the last 2 years. So now 40% of Republicans in America regularly watch Fox, but only 15% of Democrats watch Fox. And this thing has been going on for a decade, at least since we've been able to, survey researchers have been able to follow it. But it's not just a Fox phenomenon, and that's why I think the point I want to make is how our media consumption has polarized, both in partisan terms and ideological terms. And while I'm not going to be able to, in the short time of this introductory remarks, I hope I'll get some questions about why do we think this has happened, Is it the media, or is it the changed media environment, or is it us in our own perceptions? But notice that this is not just a Fox phenomenon. Here's CNN over the same period, the blue line's Democrats and the red line's Republicans, fittingly enough. But and you'll see that CNN has hemorrhaged viewers since 2008. It's gone down in almost all categories, particularly Democrats. And one of the interesting things about the Pew survey shows that Democrats have seen a diminution of their interest in news for the last 2 years, essentially during the Obama administration, maybe rightly so. But you can see that the gap has still widened, and this partisan change has widened. And MSNBC is the same way. So, but I don't want to limit myself to cable news, because cable news has kind of been the poster boy of this polarization. And it extends to a wide variety of media and the way we perceive which media we can trust and which media is credible to us. Now, this is kind of a busy chart, but this is out of the Pew poll, and it's an interesting look at, they actually went and looked at 24 different categories of news organizations or specific actual shows. And what you'll see on the left is the partisan divide. Look from left to right, and that's Republican through Independent. On the right side of the column is ideology, conservative to liberal. So you can see how in all this great series of media, how this divide is so distinct. The red line you see in the center is essentially the average, it's the total, it's the mean. So if you're above that line, you've got an audience that skews Republican or conservative. If you're below that line, you've got an audience that skews Democrat or liberal. And you can look down that line and you can see that, for example, the New York Times has essentially the same political profile, and so does NPR, as the Rachel Maddow show and Keith Olbermann. Well, now, most of us know that the content is very different, and that Rachel Maddow is a pundit who makes no secret of her views, while the New York Times is a pretty straight newspaper, at least in big. But why do Americans perceive that, why do Americans select those newspapers based on their own ideology or their partisan affiliation? That's the really interesting phenomenon in all this. Is it, in fact, the press doing something different? Well, Fox is certainly different. And to some degrees, I suspect that the New York Times has done things different in the last decade or so, but not dramatically. So is it the media that's doing this? Is it the nature of the media system? Are we becoming consumers of media that consume in what we kind of gated communities, so that we go to hear like-minded, and communicate with like-minded people and get information from sources that is like-minded, and when we go there, we just get even more polarized because we are getting that like-minded. Now, scholars argue are all over the lot on why this is occurring. I think that one of the more interesting coming out of political science lately has been some studies about how over the 30-year history, America's just become more polarized. That we have where we live, and particularly in the last decade, where we live, are we married? What is our religious commitment? A whole range of kind of ideological, that really don't have anything to do with partisan preference, have really divided the country. So in effect, the red states, the red places are redder, and the blue states are bluer. And as a result, it's being reflected in our media system. Now, to what degree the media system actually drives this is one of the things that we can maybe talk about and your own perceptions of these media organizations. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Professor May. Mr. Hardy. Go ahead.
Thank you, Beth, Dean Dennison, and Marshall community for allowing me to speak with you today. So Professor May showed us that we are seeing a polarized split in mass media today, or at least what we would consider kind of traditional journalism. He did have some news blogs up there, but we're talking mostly about television. And the question is, why does this matter? Why do we care about this? And the one thing I want to put out there is an idea of a correct vote. And what a correct vote is, the vote that a citizen makes for a candidate that is most in line with their own policy preferences. And so for a representative democracy to work, we need these citizens to make this correct vote. Unfortunately, as citizens, we do not get to know the candidates personally. We don't have time to sit there and talk to them face to face. And we have to rely on mediated representations of these candidates. And this is where this becomes a concern, because we don't know the accuracy of these mediated representations. Because on some sides, you're going to find deception where they might be overstating a candidate's past voting records or achievements, and they might be attacking and misleading the voting records and the personal characteristics and the experience of the candidate on the opposing side. But I just want to put that out there. What I want to bring the discussion to is, because we have such a polarized audience, a polarized polity, where we have 30% on each side, 30% independents, and within that you have roughly a bunch of people that don't vote as well. And on top of that, because of the way the Electoral College is, one vote in one state doesn't mean the same thing as a vote in another state. So there's a small group of voters that candidates really want to woo and get their votes. And I want to talk a little bit about the changing environment of campaigning advertising of the 2008 presidential election, and some of the stuff that the Obama campaign that was different, or we haven't seen this kind of techniques in a long time. The first thing that they spent, well, first of all, they spent most of their money on broadcast local advertising spots, and that's pretty much consistent. And the reason why they do that is because you can target a media market. Now, West Virginia, I believe, has a media market where Charleston and Huntington are together as one media market. I believe that's correct, and that's a pretty big area. So what the Obama campaign did is they started focusing more on cable and radio. They spent a lot more money on cable and radio advertising than our campaigns have done in the last few elections. And the reason why they do this is you can focus on individuals, both demographically and geographically. For example, the way the cable systems and the radio systems are set up, they're not set up on these Nielsen ratings or markets, which are big, huge groups of zip codes. Cable systems and radios are actually focused more on the zip code level. And you can put in a message at a zip code level and focus on specifically those few people in that small market. Now, you can also focus demographically. And by doing this, you can get messages to certain people that are more likely to listen to certain radio ads and certain cable stations. One thing that the Obama focused on a lot was using radio and cable to reach a growing Hispanic population. So we have also a language demographic that we can, or a language target that we can focus on. And what they also did is they put some deceptive claims in these smaller markets that are out of the earshot of the fact checkers of the mainstream news media. A couple other changes in the traditional media, what I mean by traditional media, again, television and radio and newspaper, is the use of Obama and DirecTV, and where he had his own channel. He had an actual television channel on a satellite cable provider, DirecTV, where it looped a 2-minute bio of him. And while on that channel, there was a button that says on your remote plus select, and you can go to the Obama On Demand station. So the cable companies are really pushing this towards the campaigns to start using On Demand as a new way to reach voters. And one thing that we haven't seen in a long time, which Obama did, was buy a 30-minute advertisement during prime time on the 3 major networks and a few cable companies. And this is a technique called roadblocking. And he did it a few days before the election, where you just buy out all the media and you just roadblock your message through. Another interesting development that's happened recently is a Supreme Court case, Citizens United versus the FCC. And what the Supreme Court stated is that corporate funding of independent groups of the campaigns cannot be restricted. And what this means is that there might be an infusion of corporate funding into presidential campaigns or political campaigns. We'll see if that happens or not. But what's interesting is the Citizens United is a group that made Hillary the movie. It's a group that produced Hillary the movie, a documentary that was unflattering of Senator Clinton. So it'll be interesting to see if now we'll see if documentaries, maybe more movie type of media, are going to be influential in changing perceptions of candidates. But with all this micro-targeting and I guess an echo chamber where the conservatives listen to conservative media, the liberals listen to the media, we find a polity that have different information and different claims and different presuppositions about the candidates. And a question that I would like to put out is, what does this mean when we come together as a nation and talk about national issues, when people are deliberating with different notions of what is right and what is wrong, or different notions of what is truthful and what is not truthful? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And Dr. Rupp.
Okay. What we've heard is that Professor May has sketched this landscape of polarization. And Mr. Hardy has looked at this question of how candidates are targeting. They are either exploiting or contributing to this polarized landscape and using the new technologies of what we call the social media. My charge is to say, what does this mean for us in the Mountain State? Okay, how do these new technologies and new techniques will affect specifically this upcoming election? And what I would like to start with the most famous quote on West Virginia politics, and that is, everything is political except politics, which is what? Personal. Okay? What that quote tells us about our state is that we take politics very seriously. We may have a part-time legislature, but we have full-time politics in this state. An editor told me they have to hire someone from Louisiana because that's another state where politics is personal, serious, and parochial, to come up here and understand our landscape. The other thing it tells me about is it's personal, okay? We want face-to-face. And what I want to outline while we look at this media is that our state is in a transition. It's gone from retail politics, face-to-face, personal politics, to wholesale politics, where you have TV ads, okay? And our politicians have to be good in both. And before I look at this, let me talk about the icon who was perfect in the old traditional way, and that was Senator Robert C. Byrd, who literally set up a personal network that he once boasted to me that he knew at least 3 people in every town, and they knew him. He was sort of like George Washington slept here. That's what Robert C. Byrd did to the state. And let me tell you a quick story on how I first was introduced to Senator Byrd. I was a new assistant professor, and our college was going to give a college degree, honorary degree to him, and one of the students said, wasn't he a member of the KKK? So the dean called me in and said, investigate this, Rupp. Well, I investigated that and found out basically that was years ago, and as the head of the NAACP said, son, I don't care what he did 40 years ago. I'm happy with what he's been doing the last 30. But I walk in at 7:30 in the morning, and who is on the phone? The senator. And what's his first question? Who are you? We live in an Appalachian culture where we want to know who you are, and we're suspicious about strangers, and it didn't do very well that I had just moved down from Ohio. Then he asked the second question. When we don't know you, what does he ask? Do you know? And he named John O'Brien and Kathleen Reemschneider, 2 people in Buchanan. Luckily, my daughter went to school with O'Brien's grandson, and Reemschneider was a member of the Methodist Church. I say this because that's the politics we practice, personal. And that's the politics we're leaving in going to the wholesale, except for what? What is Facebook? Facebook is an attempt to bring personal connections. So basically, who are you going to believe? The traditional media, the traditional ads, the newspaper, the endorsements, or are you going to believe someone who comes in on Facebook or the friend that gives you that email? Suddenly we're back here, and that silo is being reinforced by this new, what I call, social media. And I see this in the governor's election because they have to play both sides. Go to Manchin's website, and what does he have? Facebook friends. I'll give you the stats. Manchin has 5,460 friends. Racy only has 2,709 friends, okay? And it's this idea of, but I'm going to tell you, people, Websites and Facebooks are not going to win elections. You win elections by what? Mobilizing the voter and getting them to vote. So our question is, how do these new technologies in this divided, partisan, polarized landscape, how are they going to work right here in West Virginia? And we already saw how Mr. Hardy talked about how Obama, sophisticated, used these. Will Manchin and Racy use these sophisticated techniques of social media? Okay? And what I come to is the extraordinary thing is that this is a Tea Party year. This is a Tea Party movement. It's a movement, not an organization. And what we've seen here is that we have a history of social media using this. Let me start. Where was social media first effectively used? Howard Dean, remember setting up the networks and the list? He literally lived by the YouTube, and what destroyed Howard Dean? The screen, right? Then we have Obama, who elevates it to a whole new level. Now we have online events, get together, right? And that's the other one. Then what happened in 2006? Not only how do you mobilize voters, but what happened in 2006 with George Allen, who was going to be a presidential contender? The macaca moment. One lousy 30-second mistake defines the candidate, okay? So here we're sitting here. Now the Tea Party candidate has used those democratic techniques to attack Republican establishment candidates. And we've seen that in the sense when we look at what happened in Colorado, what happened in Nevada, and just recently what happened in Delaware with O'Donnell's surprising victory. Now, this is the situation. There was no O'Donnell campaign. There were no O'Donnell resources until the Tea Party came in and set up this network. And what they did is first they take advantage of the environment, then they find an issue. The issue could be that Castle voted against cap and trade, or that Castle, and this is a quote, tried to impeach George Bush. Now, what happens is the old days, if I'm running for office, I want to get the endorsement. I want to talk about my experience. But what the Tea Party is saying, endorsements don't mean anything. They're out there. Experience doesn't mean anything. Let me tell you what this person did. Here's the proof, and who's doing the telling on that Twitter, on that email. My friend is telling me I can't trust that person. What does this mean for Manchin? He's running scared. Because can Racy do what the Tea Party does? Can they exploit a bad economic situation? Can they find one issue to go in? And can they bring in new voters? Not only is Manchin running scared, but even Ray Hall is running scared. Worried that it's bad times. What's that one issue? Not supporting coal. And will it bring in turnout? So the question is, if there is high turnout in 2010, it's not going to be traditional voters, just traditional voters with traditional sources. It's going to be the new voters that are brought in, not by the endorsements, but by what I call social media. So fasten your seatbelts. Even West Virginia, that we were kind of up and above everything else, we were doing it, and the mechanism is the new media.
Thank you, Dr. Rupp. I told you this would be a very interesting discussion. We will be taking your questions, and if you have one, just raise your hand, and I'll call on you. You're just going to have to speak loudly so that we can hear you. But if you want to enter into the discussion, please don't hesitate to do so. We've heard very, very interesting remarks by these folks, and it occurs to me of one other thing that I would like to ask our audience, just one other thing. Don't be afraid to raise your hand when I ask this question. How many of you saw Bristol Palin on Dancing with the Stars last night? There you go, there you go, there you go. Reality television. And the Palin, as a political family, the Palins are using reality television pretty effectively, we're going to find. So that is also in the mix. Not only do we have newscasts and newspapers and social networking and blogs and campaign ads and major campaigns and tea parties and everything else, Supreme Court decisions, we've got reality TV in the mix now too. So let's talk more about this polarized split that you all have talked about. Dr. Rupp, you talked about mobilizing the voter. How do you mobilize the voter in a polarized political landscape? Kind of a question for all three of you. How do you mobilize the voter when we're so polarized in our political landscape?
Well, polarization engages. Polarization on the extremes causes more engagement. In fact, you can look at the turnouts of the 2004 and 2008 elections were the highest since the 1960s. So polarization does not mean that and polarization may be good. I mean, there may be some facets of polarization that are important, both from a media sense that you get clearer messages, you get more ways, information to make choices. But so polarization drives voters instead. And there are a lot of other indices of showing that Americans got a lot more involved in 2004 and 2008 than they had in the past. So it's not that simple. It can get voters out, not keep
So
them home.
polarization is a good thing.
It can be.
Well, we'll see.
I will second that, but the polarization, it's a narrative, though. It's a narrative of a contest. It's them against us against them. Look at the way that they cover presidential debates, or any debates. They gave a knockout blow. There was a touchdown pass. I mean, when we start using sports metaphors to talk about politics, especially during issue policy debates, it adds into this narrative. And I think polarization in of itself has become a narrative, and it gets people motivated to be part of a team.
And I think, just as I pointed out, it used to be, someone once said, do you really want 90% of the Americans to vote? Okay? Because that's the ideal, but the question is, they're voting on what? How informative are they? And if anything, how does this new social media misinform or use deception to bring them when they're coming to the polls? But I'm right, partisan, they're getting excited. What's the one thing we hate is passivity, right? We certainly aren't having that, but I'm also worried about education in terms of if we live in these silo-gated communities and if you get misinformation, there's no checking on it.
Professor May, you said the separation between the press and the party is disappearing. Where will it lead?
I don't fear the return of a partisan press. I do think that the biggest problem involving this is a serious blurring of the line between opinion and news. That, I think, even in mainstream news organizations, you see this. See, the New York Times is doing a lot more analysis and columns on the front page. So it's not just cable, but cable clearly is one of the drivers. Mm-hmm. But I think, a lot of people think Rush Limbaugh is a journalist.
Yes.
I mean, there's this kind of blurring and confusion, I think, from a perspective of a journalist. Mm-hmm. That worries me. Mm-hmm. Does it make a lot of difference to the end receiver if they get facts from Limbaugh or from the New York Times? Well, if they're the same facts, I suppose.
Yeah, right. But there almost needs to be an education process, and I'm particularly thinking about the older viewer who, watched Walter Cronkite every night for how many years, and then in this media landscape turns on Lou Dobbs and thinks Lou Dobbs is an anchor like Walter Cronkite was an anchor, and doesn't recognize that what this particular talking face is telling you isn't like Walter Cronkite told you.
That's that blurring.
That's that blurring. That's that blurring. And there needs to be, I think, almost an education of the TV audience about what you're watching. Maybe they know, but maybe some of them don't. That's all I'm saying. Mr. Hardy, you talked about the techniques of the Obama campaign, focused on the zip code level, used radio and cable very effectively. Does that set the tone now for every presidential campaign to come, or what's next?
We'll see. The actual cable industry is courting campaigns by coming up with a lot of new technology specifically for the advertising push by them during the presidential years. So we'll see. We'll see if that happens. But the thing is that Obama had unbelievable amounts of money to be able to do these things. The McCain campaign, unfortunately, didn't have that much money, and he wasn't able to keep up with them. So targeting costs a lot of money, as opposed to buying local broadcast spots around local news, which has usually been the past kind of model because it's cheap, and you can target a little bit. But so we'll see. We'll see if
So we'll see what's next in the
we'll
landscape
see what's next.
out
It
there.
depends on what kind of money there. In 2004, which is interesting, in 2004, there's a book written by Matt Dowd, who was Bush's campaign, one of Bush's campaign managers, and it was called Applebee's America. And what they used is they actually used credit card purchases. They were market targeting, doing data mining that what health insurance and all these other companies do to underwrite insurance. They were getting and finding out what every individual purchased and find out where they purchased it, how they purchased it, and they were targeting that way. And Matt Dowd said this is the way of the future. This is how we're going to do targeting through data mining. And in 2008, we didn't see it at all. So I don't want to speculate.
Is that right?
I would say, how is this going to apply to West Virginia? Both candidates in the Senate race will spend a whole lot of money. But what's really we're looking for is when the outside people come in and spend the money. Mm-hmm. And when I see that happening in this congressional district, and also the first, they're open. We only have 40 days left. So what will happen is in the next 2 weeks, the decision is going to be made by big outside money to come in to either one or both congressional races, and also on the same side of the Senate race. And in that case, they are bringing in more than money. They're bringing in expertise, and I think their goal is to get that non-voter or low voter and increase turnout by bringing them to the polls. Mm-hmm. So I think we're Act One. We're almost at the verge. This state could take off, but it has to do so in the next 20 days, and it has to mean large expenditures from the outside coming in, which we don't like outsiders in this state.
I was just about to point that out. You read my mind.
And a candidate could win in a personal state like this by saying they are trying to come in and buy that election. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the danger. These people in Washington, they think they have a template, and they just, well, applies for all, and they don't read the local political culture, oftentimes that.
They will often produce just one ad and change just the faces and the names on the ad, but the same music, same graphics, same voice. And this is, as a person who reads out loud for a living, I think the most thing about campaign ads is this really sarcastic woman talking about this candidate. I mean, really? Do they really think that we have to hear it like this? Oh. All right, to our guests, Dr. Robert Rupp, Professor Albert May, and soon-to-be Dr. Bruce Hardy. Thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. Thank you all. Thank you.